Well, look who it is. Did you seriously think you could just walk by without saying hello?
Oh, is little Eddie cold? Maybe you should take your sign and go home before you catch a cold.
Have you ever come across a moment that completely rewrites what you thought you knew about people? A moment that makes you stop and wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's still hope left in this world. It happened on a cold afternoon in a small city where most people walked fast, eyes glued to their phones, pretending not to see what was right in front of them. Near the corner of a busy street sat a boy, barely 12 years old. His clothes thin and worn, his shoes too small, his face pale and tired. He held a small piece of cardboard that said in shaky letters, "Hungry. Please help." The wind blew hard, carrying the smell of rain and dust. The boy shivered but didn't move. He had learned that if you sit still, people sometimes drop a coin, maybe a sandwich. He had also learned that most don't even look. That day, though, it wasn't the rain or the cold that hurt him the most. It was what came next. A group of young men walked by, laughing loudly, dressed in jackets that looked new, holding coffee cups and phones. One of them noticed the boy and slowed down. He pointed, smirked, and said something to his friends. The others laughed. They began to circle him, throwing words sharper than knives. "Get a job, kid. Bet he just wants money for drugs. Look at him, pretending to be hungry." The boy didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the ground, holding his little sign. But silence only made them crueler. One of the men kicked over the cup sitting by the boy's feet. The few coins he had collected scattered across the sidewalk, rolling into the gutter. The boy scrambled to grab them, but a boot came down, hard, crushing one beneath its heel. People saw. Cars passed. A couple across the street looked over and then turned away. Someone even took out a phone and started recording. Not to help, just to have something to post later. The boy tried to get up, but one of the men pushed him down again. Laughter echoed against the walls. And then, above the noise, a different sound broke through. Deep, steady, and heavy. The unmistakable growl of a motorcycle engine. It came closer, louder, until it drowned everything else out. The bullies turned their heads. The crowd followed their gaze. A single bike stopped at the curb, chrome gleaming under the dull gray sky. The rider switched off the engine, and for a moment, there was only silence. He swung his leg over, boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. The man stood tall, broad shoulders, long beard, arms covered in tattoos. His black leather jacket carried the unmistakable patch, Hell's Angels. Even people who knew nothing about bikes knew that name. It meant power. It meant danger. It meant you didn't mess around. The group of young men froze. One of them laughed nervously, pretending not to care, but everyone could feel the air change. The biker walked forward slowly, not saying a word. His eyes moved from the bullies to the boy on the ground. He saw the torn sign, the broken cup, the bruises starting to form on the kid's arm. Without a word, he took off his leather gloves and knelt beside the boy. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his voice low, rough but calm. The boy didn't answer. He just looked up, confused. No one had spoken to him kindly in a long time. The biker placed a hand on his shoulder and said again, "You're safe now." Then he stood up and turned to the men who had been laughing a minute earlier. His expression didn't change, but his silence was louder than any shout. The leader of the group tried to smile. "Hey man, we were just joking. Pick up his money," the biker interrupted. His tone was calm, but it carried weight. No one argued. One by one, they bent down and started gathering the coins they had kicked away. "Now apologize," he said. The street was dead quiet. The men muttered a few words, barely audible. The biker stepped closer. Louder. This time, they said it properly. "Sorry, kid." The biker nodded. "Now get out of here." They didn't wait for him to say it twice. Within seconds, they were gone, swallowed by the traffic and the noise of the city that had suddenly come back to life. The man turned back to the boy. "Let's get you something warm," he said. He helped him up gently, took off his jacket, and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. The jacket looked enormous on him, but the boy didn't care. For the first time in months, he felt safe. As they walked toward a small diner down the street, the biker waved to another man on a motorcycle who had just arrived. Within minutes, several more bikes pulled up. Big, loud machines, all wearing the same patch. The Hell's Angels weren't there to cause trouble. They were there because one of their own had called for help. Inside the diner, the waitress froze for a second when the group walked in. The leather jackets, the tattoos, the noise. But then she saw the boy. The biker spoke first. "We need a hot meal for him. Whatever's best. And a hot chocolate if you got one." The woman nodded, eyes softening. "Coming right up." The boy sat quietly, staring at the steaming plate in front of him. He hadn't eaten something warm in days. The biker sat across from him, still without his jacket, his arms covered in faded ink that told stories of a rough life. "You got a name?" he asked. "Eddie?" the boy said quietly. "Well, Eddie, my name's Mason," the biker replied. "And from now on, no one touches you like that again. Not on my watch." Eddie didn't know what to say. He just nodded and kept eating. The men around them laughed softly. Not the loud kind of laughter from earlier on the street, but the kind that feels safe, like family. As the hours passed, Mason listened to the boy's story. Eddie had run away from a shelter months ago. His mother had passed, his father was gone, and he had nowhere left to go. Mason didn't ask for details. He just listened. When Eddie finished, Mason said, "You remind me of me, kid. I was your age when I hit the streets. Thought no one cared, but one man did. He gave me a meal and told me I was worth something. That's how I made it. So I guess it's my turn now." Outside, word had spread. Someone from the crowd had posted a short video online. A Hell's Angel stepping in to defend a homeless kid. Within hours, it went viral. People couldn't believe it. The image of a man society labeled as a dangerous outlaw standing up for a child hit something deep. But Mason didn't care about any of that. He wasn't in it for attention. Before he left the diner, he spoke to the manager and paid for a week's worth of meals for the boy. Then he gave the waitress a number. "If you see him again, call me." The next day, Eddie was waiting outside the same diner. Mason showed up as promised. "You ready for some work?" he asked. Eddie nodded. Mason took him to the garage where he and his friends fixed bikes. It was noisy, greasy, and full of laughter. For the first time in a long time, Eddie smiled. Days turned into weeks. Mason taught him how to clean parts, polish chrome, and change oil. The men treated him like a little brother, teasing him, feeding him, protecting him. Mason made sure he stayed in school too. "You got brains, kid. Don't waste them," he'd say. Months later, the story resurfaced again. A reporter tracked them down, wanting an interview. Mason refused. "We're not heroes," he said. "We just did what everyone should have done." But Eddie spoke up. "He saved my life," he said quietly. "Not just that day, every day after." That clip went everywhere. Thousands of comments poured in. Some said it restored their faith in humanity. Others said it made them cry. But for Mason, it wasn't about any of that. It was about a boy who now had a chance to live without fear. One evening, Eddie asked, "Why did you help me? You didn't even know me." Mason looked at him and smiled. "Because someone once stopped for me when nobody else would. Because I know what it feels like to be left on the ground." He paused for a moment, then added, "Strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about who you protect when no one else will." Years later, Eddie would go on to work at a shelter for homeless kids. On his desk sat a small framed photo. A young boy wearing a leather jacket far too big for him, standing beside a bearded biker with a proud smile. Underneath it were just a few words written in black marker. "Never forget who picked you up." The story of that night lived on, not through headlines or fame, but through every act of kindness that followed. Because sometimes, the loudest moments in life aren't the ones filled with noise. They're the ones that leave everyone silent. And if you ever find yourself standing in a crowd, watching someone fall, remember this. It only takes one person to change everything. One act of courage to turn fear into respect and despair into hope. So the next time you hear that deep roar of a motorcycle in the distance, maybe you'll think twice. Because somewhere out there, a man with a rough past and a heavy heart might just be on his way to do something beautiful again. Something that'll remind the world what true humanity looks like.